All right. So, welcome to another Run Wild with Us. Ask Us Anything. You are here with myself. I'm Lisa Kastner. I'm the founder and executive editor for Running Wild and RIZE. And Ben White, who is one of our absolutely brilliant editors. And we are here with you, I'd say most Thursdays, barring if I get sick or no one else shows up. Nah, if no one else shows up, I'll still join. It's fine. But we are here to answer any questions that you may have around publishing, editing, the craft of writing, marketing. What's the responsibilities of an author? What's the responsibility of an editor? I don't know. You can make crap up. It's all good. We'll do our best to answer the question. And all you got to do is go ahead and put your question into the comment section. Nope, that way. And what'll happen is I will repeat your question, and then Ben and I will do our best to respond. So I think the biggest news we have right now is we just accepted, I think it was like 15 novels or stories. And so I've been spending the last 2 weeks meeting with authors and, answering their questions and all that kind of fun stuff. So, and we now have Amy Hardy, who is also another one of our brilliant editors. And again, if you got, honestly,
Adult supervision is showing up.
woo! In all honesty, I think we all three of us could use adult supervision in some capacity, but that's totally fine. So if you're watching us, then we are well, hopefully we're live. If we're live, like I said, just go ahead and pop your question in the comments section. Each one of us will take a turn unless you're like, no, I only want Amy to answer my question, and then we'll be all hands off. It's all good.
What can we do?
So yeah. So with that, I don't know, Ben and Amy, if you guys have any topics that you want to cover or um, anything interesting going on.
Over here it's back to school season, so it's been a little crazy, but in a good way. And it's kind of exciting too because I'm like looking at all the book lists and stuff for my daughter's school, and there's tons of like new titles on this, like the reading list for this year. I'm very
Mm.
encouraged. It makes me happy because I love, yeah, fresh new voices in the curriculum. Is really cool.
Oh wow, that's great. So you mean
Yeah,
like new? So not
yeah, like
everyone
in
doesn't
the
have to
past
read.
5 years, yeah, have been published. So yeah, it's nice.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
great.
I
That's
know.
that's super fun.
Yeah.
When I was in school long ago and far away, I actually switched schools. I think it was like 3 or 4 years in a row, and one school was like, okay, you have to read Animal Farm. And then I go to the next one and they're like, you need to read Animal Farm. And I was like, well, I did that. Why don't we give me something else? They were like, no. I into Animal Farm, and there were like 3 or 4 books that they just had me keep reading and then doing you know your lovely essays and Q&As on them, which may
Mhm.
explain a lot about my brain. But anyway, so that's wonderful that now they're
Yeah.
actually leveraging more current novels and stories in general. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Really cool.
Ben, how about you? What are you up to? What's
Well,
exciting?
I was just reminded of Kurt Vonnegut along along that same conversation. Kurt Vonnegut was quoted as saying something like he's always surprised that they're still reading Slaughterhouse Five in high school. So
Right?
so now you'll be happy that they're not. They've moved on. But
Now if
as we wait for a question to show up, I do have an Animal Farm question or story
mm,
because it
do
was
it.
on the reading list in high school,
Mhm.
but I didn't read the reading list, so I was out of luck. Think
Wait.
about that. You got to read the reading list first. But when I was stationed in Germany with the Army, um, I met a girl who was reading Animal Farm in English. She was a German girl reading it in English.
Mhm.
And she asked me what a word meant.
Mhm.
And she said, I had no idea what the word meant. She said, it was got something to do with the hands. And I said, well, oh, it must be something to do with the hands. It must be some kind of maybe a skin condition on the hands.
Mhm.
And it ended up that she was saying hens. And I said, oh, chickens. In the Animal Farm with chickens, of course. And I felt really bad that I hadn't read it. Especially when she rolled her eyes and looked at me like, you idiot, and walked off. Wait for me. But that's my Animal Farm story. I have read it since. I have read it, but
Well,
not
that's
then.
good, I think.
Yeah.
um, I had a couple of really interesting. I had the most bizarre like week and a half, in terms of, well, in general. And there was about a 72-hour period where, authors were setting up meetings with me, which is great, right? To answer questions. And a lot of them asked the same questions. And I thought, I've never heard this before. Like, no one's ever asked me these kind of questions. So I brought it up to a dear friend of mine who's like a huge bestseller, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, I make you bet there was an article in Writer's Digest, because you're right. Those questions are so outdated that they must have all read like the same article, or, seen the same interview or something like that. And typically Writer's Digest is, at least a couple of years behind. But I thought, we could always, if no one has questions, we can always talk about what some of these questions were, because you may actually find this kind of interesting. Um, but like one of the key questions I was asked was, what was the print run? What's our standard print run? And I don't know how many people don't know this, but there is no such thing as a print run anymore. Like, this isn't, Ben Franklin doesn't have this big print machine, and it's not running, and that, they don't have a limited time period. You can only run, what, like 10 books or something like that a day. None of that exists anymore. Everything is, although, they some areas of publishing like to be snooty about this, but pretty much almost everything now is print on demand. And what I mean by that is, um, all the actual print copies are based on digital files. So it makes it much, 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 much easier to print paperback and hardback, and much faster. So whereas it used to be, like I referenced, maybe you needed a couple of days or a week to print 1,000 books. Now, I mean, you could probably do it in a day or 2 days or something like that, right? So because of that, what's happened is, many publishers now, what they do is they base the number of books that are going to be printed on what the pre-orders are. And that's actually the expectation of the distributor as well, right? So the publisher and the distributor are monitoring what are the pre-orders, and then the publisher has the accountability to then say, okay, based on these pre-orders, I think we should order X amount, right? And the distributor also makes recommendations based on their experiences as well. So again, whereas once upon a time, you had a standing number of pre-orders, or yeah, pre-orders. Now, because everything is so flexible, you just monitor it. And so once a month, you sit down and you look at, okay, what's selling, what's not selling, and based on what's selling and what's coming up, how many books do we think we need to print now? Because you're going to be able to knock it out within a week. The only reasons now really that it would take longer is if, like there's a paper shortage, which we all know had occurred during COVID, right? And that had to do with the supplies for actually creating the paper, that there were limitations in actually receiving it, right? So, you know, Nowadays, so much of this is so heavily dependent on ensuring that, not only the publisher but the author, and we'll talk about that in a minute too, because I want to get to Dawn's question and her comment. um it's there's such a heavy dependency on the publisher and the author, especially the author nowadays, to ensure that there is actually a heavy pre-order, and that the orders continue coming forward. So hope that made sense. Dawn McIntyre says, I've just heard that sensitivity readers are a thing. Folks who read manuscripts looking for anything that might offend any reader. What are your thoughts? A good idea or kind of scary? I liked Animal Farm, by the way, but I only had to read it once. I liked it too, but three times is more than enough. I don't know, Amy. Why don't you tackle Dawn's question first? What do you think about sensitivity readers?
Yeah. So, yeah, they are a thing. Usually they're used though when you have maybe sensitive issues, or you have maybe, like we were talking, I think a few weeks ago, about writing characters that are different from, your perspective, and kind of running those, voices, those ideas, that plot line by readers who would know or who have that experience. So I think they can be really useful in that way. I don't think many people are just randomly sending to sensitivity readers. Your beta readers are probably really good at letting you know if there's any kind of issues that they see. I'm trying to think of other things that come up, but yeah, sensitivity readers definitely are a thing. But yeah, I don't. They're just used on those sensitive issues in general.
Ben, what are your thoughts?
Uh, Actually, I had this discussion with another one of our editors
Mm,
2 weeks ago, and he was reading not as a sensitivity reader, but he was reading with sensitivity, and
Mhm.
so he had a question that came up. So I think there's, like Amy says, those editors and readers with that eye on it are attuned to the sensitive issues that need to be addressed, or at least talked through and settled before, say, well, yeah, that's not gonna offend anybody. Let's do it. and but because I think the sensitivity reader has to watch out for being biased on their own
mm,
sensitivities, and they have to
Mhm.
be open-eyed, open-minded, open-hearted, and empathetic to a wide range of things that could be trigger points. And so it's not a bad thing to have. I don't think, especially like Amy said, with sensitive issues, but it's just a matter of knowing who that sensitivity reader is and where they're coming from. I think it's got to be somebody you trust, and
Mhm.
that's
yeah,
where the
and
conversation came up that I was talking about with the editors. We had a good conversation about how to handle a certain direction the story was going, and it was a Native American issue,
mm,
and he caught it, and it was kind of a red flag to him, and we talked about it to make sure that it had purpose in the novel,
and
which
that's
is which is
that's
the underlying.
right. That's
Yeah.
critical. And that, to Ben's point, sometimes uh everyone has biases. I mean, that's just fact, right? Whether we like to admit it or not, every single human being has biases. So is whatever is being referenced or inferred within the story, does it have a purpose or not, right? That's really what you're looking for, or what you should be looking for as an editor. Um, I was just at a writer's coffee house on Sunday, and a similar topic came up. And the question came up, like, do you use a sensitivity reader, right? And if so, why? And, and do you have a warning, like a sensitivity warning on the work? I personally think, unless it's really extreme, that's going too far, right? If you're buying horror, you know that there's going to be blood and gore in it, because guess what? It's horror. right? I mean, if you're reading fantasy, there's going to be some type of supernatural elements to it, cuz guess what? It's fantasy. I mean, so part of this is, what makes sense for readers. What's going to actually help them. I know we have used sensitivity readers on occasion. Again, though, to Ben's point, when we've used sensitivity readers, typically it's because either the editor or the author is concerned about a portion of the actual story itself, and they're worried that, not necessarily offending someone, but like there may be some underlying bias that they are now aware of, or that they're afraid is uh, leaning the story in a certain way that they don't necessarily intend, right? Uh, the times I've seen sensitivity readers also being beneficial is it's not so much reading the entire work to confirm something. It's like going through a dialogue, segments of dialogue, and seeing, does this ring true? Would someone from this type of background, and who's had similar experiences, would they actually say this kind of stuff? And like a good example of that actually would be, right now I'm in the middle of editing a historical fiction novel, in set in uh, like samurai period Japan, right? And um, whether, and I know that's absolutely wrong, but what I think most people don't realize is contractions were not actually used in language in general until around the 1700s. So and especially in writing. So if I'm looking at something and I'm reading it and there's dialogue going on and these two characters are in like the 1500s, and I already know that contractions were not used in language in general until the 1700s, then I'm going to flag that, because to me that pulls me out of the story, right? And it also, whether the author realizes or not, it's pulling all readers out of the story, because you may not know why this isn't quite ringing true for you, but you know that there is something that's wrong. Same thing with using like a word like dude. No one said dude in 17th century. At least I don't think so. And if that term was used, then most likely it wasn't used in the same context or with the same intent as is used today. So, it's that kind of thing that we're looking for, where I believe there is benefit in using a sensitivity reader. That to me makes sense, right? It's interesting to me too, though, in that I have a dear friend who's from South Africa, meaning like was born and raised in South Africa and then moved to the United States, and she actually gets mad when someone approaches her and asks her to basically represent all of those of African descent. And guess what? She's right. Because if someone's asking her to read, uh, you know, uh, uh, a novel that's set in, let's say, the South of the United States, and give her opinion on a portion that is, about with two characters who are of African American descent, right? She doesn't know, right? She didn't grow up in that background. She doesn't also does not live in the South. So, and by the way, that changes over time, right? Because and that's not just true for African Americans. It's true for every generation. Every generation has their own unique way of speaking and approaching things and so on, right? And I mean, and there's tons of articles that are written about the difference between a Gen Xer versus a millennial versus um, like a baby boomer. So it's, not that in itself, assuming like, hey, if I just grab some white person and they can represent every single white person across the globe, that's stupid. And it's going to be stupid no matter the ethnicity. It's good because it's not just that. It's not just skin color. So, and I go for it, folks. He hit the hell out of me for calling that stupid, but guess what? It's still stupid. Okay. Caroline Shannon Davenport says, good to see all of you. Good to see you too. All right, question. What could be considered in a novel as sensitive? Sounds frightening to me as a writer. Are there things in a novel that, if it is true to the time and the period and story, but would be considered sensitive? Like calling someone who is called black now, but during the time period was called colored. That's a really good question. This time I'll start with Ben.
Uh, the one thing that jumps out to me first is the cultural misappropriation
Mm,
of writing about something you don't know about, and that raising sensitivity and we talk so much now about the marginalized voices and having a voice that isn't marginalized talking about or for a marginalized voice may be very sensitive and on the border of that misappropriation of experience. And so it would be very sensitive to the reader to say, what are you talking about? That's just not right. And so there has to be some responsibility for the writer to do the research and the homework and know what they're talking about when they talk about it. We mentioned it a couple of 2 weeks ago, I think, with if the character is being someone who is misappropriating or being a voice that sounds like somebody you know, and it advances the story, even what they're saying is sensitive, it's because that character may be true. So you have to use that voice for that character to have them be true. But it's got to be done in a way so the reader knows that character is not informed, not educated, not has a worldview of a 30-mile radius, and so I know a lot of people who have a worldview of 30-mile radius, but
if
and
that.
especially in a period piece where the language the language is key, and sometimes language is a character in a story, and if you want it to ring true, it's got to be what the people in that time frame would have used, whether it's a contraction or whether it's a derogatory term towards another race. Um, you have to use it, I think, but you also have to know that you're writing about a period that some people will not want to remember or not to have resurrected.
Mm,
And so it's a good balance, and I think it goes right back to what we're talking about, advancing the story. It's got to advance the story, and it can't be racism for racism's sake. It's got to be racism because racism was part of the language of the place you're writing about and the people.
Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, Ben, that was great. Really, when you're telling these stories, you want to be as true to these characters as possible. And so that's where you really have to do research if you're writing from, a place that's not of your background. And then also thinking about, these are characters and this is why we write, is to really bring them to life and to show people a different point of view. And we all want to do justice to those characters. So that's where, your beta readers, sensitivity readers, your editor, you're probably going to have these big, conversations about, this is what I was going for. Maybe I need to adjust certain things. Maybe I need to do some more research. Maybe I need to talk to more people. But it's all that process of bringing that character to life and telling that story in a way that does it justice. You're not just flippantly, using these terms or showing people who are, two-dimensional or one-dimensional, which happens in a lot of books, is really sitting down and showing that character, letting them come to life for another person so that maybe they can change that reader in some way. I mean, that's why we all write, is really to get these stories across and to let these characters walk around in people's minds a little bit and share it. And yeah, with sensitive issues, I know sometimes it can be a little intimidating because you don't want to offend anybody, but if there's purpose and there's intention behind it, definitely that is your job as the writer, is to let people hear those stories.
Yeah, and both of you, I couldn't agree more. And just to kind of augment what was already said, you know, at least I hope we're all writing to change the world in some positive way. And unfortunately, that does mean that sometimes you're gonna you there yeah, it's a story. That means there's conflict, right? And so you're gonna have characters who are gonna say crappy things, but it's gotta do something that where propels the story forward, right? It has to serve a purpose. We you don't demonstrate, you don't bring forward or make people aware of biases, unconscious biases, or potentially bad things by not highlighting them, right? You have to bring them forward. You make it part of that story. That said, no one wants to read a two-dimensional character. You want to have a three-dimensional character. So, when they do have a bias and they do say or do things that are crappy, right? Typically they're doing it with because they believe what they're doing is right. Now, it doesn't mean that, it's not like when you're afraid and you respond in fear, you're like, oh, this is absolutely the best approach. It's that in that moment, you're just like, I am scared as hell, and therefore I'm doing something to try and defend myself, right? And that may not, depending on the point of view that's being leveraged for that narrative, that may not be obvious in those initial, in the when that character responds in a crappy way. But as the story evolves, conceptually speaking, then we get to know and understand what were their motivations of that character and why did they behave in the capacity that in which they did, or why did they say the crappy thing that they did. Now, and to go back to kind of what Amy inferred, if you are writing from a different perspective than your own, then you want to make sure that you did a ton of research, right? You want to ensure that you have spoken to people from that background, or who have had similar experiences, or who are knowledgeable regarding those activities, to make sure that what you're bringing forward is actually, it's true to what may have happened in real life. And I think that is something that is really critical. And, some may call that a sensitivity reader. I like to call it smart research and doing your homework. But, it all depends on what how you're going to call it. And to go back a little bit to the whole thing about, you want to be true to the character. I want to talk a little bit about a real experience. So, my husband is African American, and he is currently in Germany, right, for work. And he has a German coworker who is of African descent, but is born and raised in Germany. And my husband did not grow up where it was acceptable to leverage the N word, even if you felt as though, like, oh yeah, we're showing unification by using the N word. If you don't know what word I'm referencing, ask your cousin. So, um, I and this guy basically came up to my husband and said, "Yo, fill in the expletive. How's it going?" And then when my husband said, "Look, that's not acceptable. I was not raised to use that terminology, and therefore I don't find this appropriate." And the guy pushed it and kept calling him that expletive. It made him angry, obviously, right? And so the guy was basically picking a fight. So I'm using that example to kind of nail home the concept that just because a character is of a specific um, ethnicity or skin tone or background does not mean that the broad generalizations that we have as a society about what is acceptable and what is not is going to be true for that character. You need to decide. You need to, and part of making sure that that character is three-dimensional and does have their own viewpoints and their own approach to things. You need to decide through that research, through that homework, what would be true for this character and how would they respond. So I hope that makes sense.
And I
Um,
think there's a I don't know if it's a but something you can think of about your character when you're writing the character. Think about the movie that's going to be made from your story
mm,
and who would be cast in that part. And you say, well, does it matter if it's Denzel or if it's if it's Brad Pitt? Does it matter? And who's going to take the lead? And you can ask yourself that, and then write with those two options in mind, and you're going to come out with a human experience and not necessarily a racial experience or a racist experience. You're going to come across with a human experience where you could plug anybody into that leading role and or any role in your story, and just so think about it on the screen and how would you who you would want to play those parts. And if it's somebody that always looks like you for every part, you're probably writing in a two-dimensional way. You need to expand and write deeper, write more.
yeah,
Add a
actually, that's a
dimension.
great point. And if it's something where when you're writing it and you're thinking of like a specific character that maybe you read about previously, you got to be careful about that too, right? Because if you don't actually know that individual, you may be inadvertently writing in a two-dimensional capacity. So yeah, that a great question. Celerino Cordoba says, "Hello, good day. I am here. Well, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here." um, I actually, until we get another question, we actually, so for those who may not be aware, we are actually represented by the Seymour slash Alliance Agency, and myself and some of our leadership team meet with the Alliance Agency and every other week, and we kind of do a breakdown of like what's going on and how are things been going and so on. And this actually also feeds back to a conversation that I had at the Writers Coffee House. And recently I've had a couple of authors who came to me and said, I want to know what you're going to do for me. And that, like, why did you what's your vision for like marketing and publicity? And the smartest in me wants to say, you do understand we're a small press, right? Like, we don't have a large staff of individuals who are sitting around waiting for your book. But like, that's just not how it works, right? But the realist in me, the reality of today, and I've had this confirmed by huge bestsellers, I've had this confirmed by our agency, right? The reality is, I want you to sit down and think about, why do you buy the books? Why do you buy the stories you do? Do you do it because you read an ad, and in that ad you went, "Oh, this guy I've never heard of before just wrote a book. I think I need to pick it up." Probably not, right? Do you
Go ahead, because it might be mine.
Well, that's true. Most likely you're picking up the stories because a friend of yours loved it. Maybe an author that you're a huge fan of loved it. Maybe it's being offered on a deal like 99 cents through like BookBub or on Amazon, and it's gotten some great review somewhere, right? Maybe you follow this author and you're like, "Hey, this guy's pretty cool. I'd love to read what their next thing is." It's never because or I can't say never. It is very highly unlikely, like 0.05 percentage of the time, is someone picking up a book because they read an ad anymore, or they saw some advertisement, or whatever, right? it's almost always word of mouth. It's 90% of the time, I would say it is more about, does someone this person trusts, like they have an emotional buy-in for what that individual says. Did they back this story? And if they did, then they're going to pick it up, right? So the question should not be, what are you going to do for me? The question should be, how are we going to work together to make sure that those things that individuals would find, that potential readers would find the most interesting, are highlighted? And how are you as an author who are you gonna approach to read your book and to give a blurb? Who, and who would make sense to give you a blurb so that more people will be likely to pick it up, right? So, I know, believe me, all three of us here, we're all authors as well, right? Every editor is also a writer. So we all get it. But really, think actively about these things before bringing it forward. So, because otherwise, honestly, some publishers may turn around to you and say, you know what, this isn't a good fit. Like, if your expectation is that we're going to, blow like $50,000 on a marketing campaign, and you're just going to sit back and do nothing, then this is probably not going to be this is not going to be a good fit for you or for us. And I know of people who've canceled agreements because they just said, you know what, my expectation is that you're going to put me on a book tour and get me, on the New York Times bestseller list. And even the major publishers today would never ever tell you, they would never guarantee that you're going to get on the New York Times bestseller list, because that's a whole nother layer of complexity, how books actually make it onto the New York Times bestseller list, especially. So, really actively think about, how is this going to be a partnership? How are you going to work together? What are you both going to do? What are you and the publisher going to do to make sure you are as successful as possible? Because believe me, no publisher is sitting here saying, oh, you know what, I want to pick up this book so it does crappy and no one reads it. No. They're picking it, at least none that I'm aware of. At least we're picking up these stories because we think these are great stories and they have a lot of potential, and we want to make sure they get into readers' hands. And that implies we want to make sure that we want to help you in terms of, what does that marketing plan look like? How do we position the title? How do we position you, right? Because again, a lot of people, they're buying the novels, not and the memoirs and so on, not because of the story, they're buying it for the author. So you really need to think about how you are going to put yourself out there so that people they want to read your story. So I don't know.
It goes
I
back. It
just
reminds
rambled.
me of
What do you
something
guys think?
that Peter Wright said maybe a month ago or so. And Peter Wright's an acquisition editor for us. He said that when the book is done and picked up, that's about 5% of the work to get it in the reader's hands. And when I heard him say it, I'd never heard it before. It was an eye opener to hear somebody voice it. And but I started thinking about it, is that that's probably about right. And because the real work to get it in the author's hand or the reader's hands starts after it's picked up. And so that's only like 5% to write it and get it picked up. 95% is waiting for you at the other end to really market it and get it out there.
Well, and to write all the additional copy that is accompanies it, right? Anything from a log line. So a log line is like the 2 to 3 sentence pitch, right? That is used for retailers and bookstores and licensing and all kinds of stuff, right? There's the back jacket copy, right? So think about it. When you're wandering around a bookstore and you're checking something out, you're not reading the book itself typically. You're typically reading that back jacket copy, right? It's the bio, right? It's all of these additional things. Nowadays some publishers demand that you provide a synopsis up front. because they want to know if this actually has a decent story arc from day one, and if you as the author know what that arc is. So there's so much more that is done in terms of getting a book out there than actually writing the book itself, that it's a lot of really hard work. Don McIntyre says, they say writing is art until the book is done. After that, it's business. Yep. Yep. That's absolutely true. And, I actually teach a class on, building your writing career. And much of it is based on the same concept that you do for other careers. You figure out where you want to go and what you want to be when you grow up and what skills you need to do to get you there, right? And it's you do it, right? You just sit down and you knock it out. And I think a lot of times authors, not just authors, but anyone in a creative field, we make things harder on ourselves than we need to, because we want to be true to our art, or we want to be true to something without really thinking about, well, who's going to pick it up? Because that's how you're going to get paid. You don't get paid because you did something clever. You get paid because there's an audience for it. And we're just lucky that we're in a time where smaller and mid-sized houses can look at something that is a work of art, or that is really clever, and say, you know what, I think we can sell this. Like, we can figure it out, right? Versus back in the day when, I mean, no one was going to sit there and tell you, all right, I'll help you figure out how to sell this, right? You had to come forward with that yourself. You still do, don't get me wrong, but now there are just more venues in order for you to have others who will help you in figuring out what that would look like. So cool. Well, we are almost at quarter to the hour, which is crazy to me. It just means that I've probably blathered far too much compared to normal. But if you are watching this, you have a question, again, feel free, go ahead and pop it into the comments section, and I will repeat it, and all three of us will take our shot at answering that question. And if you are watching this and it is not Thursday between 5 and 6 p.m. Pacific time, or 8 and 9 p.m. Eastern time, it's not a big deal. Go ahead, feel free, pop your question in the comments section, because what I do monitor this throughout the week, and we'll use this as an opportunity to respond to the question. It's a great way for us to actually initiate the next session. So. Great question so far, guys. I'm trying to, we had, so yeah, what's your print run? Another weird question that I got a couple of times, which, and this is just a recommendation for authors. It was, tell me about your publishing house and what do you publish? The assumption, if you have submitted to a publisher, is that you've done your homework and at least read up on what that publisher does and publishes. It does not actually bode well for you as an author. I've actually seen other publishers rescind offers when they've been asked questions like that, because it can basically, it implies that the author A hasn't done their homework, B isn't doing, if they're more so just about getting their book, writing the story, they don't really have an interest in the business side, and so it can imply that the author may not be very, I don't want to say easy to work with, but there may be a lot of challenges forthcoming in the future interactions with that author. So just be careful, guys. Please just do your homework. Be professional. Caroline Shannon Davenport says, well, guys, I'm in the business mode. Awesome. Plotting my next move to work with you when Terror at the Sound of a Whistle is published by you in 2024. Looking forward to it. Now working on when I might know if you have read the second book I sent you, Last Chance Irene. So I believe, so Caroline, if you submitted it before the end of July, then we reviewed it as a part of the last submission period. We only accepted, I think, like 15 titles during that. And when we did, we already sent those acceptance letters. Anything that was submitted before the end of July and was not accepted, I already sent the declines. And if anyone's watching this and you received a decline from us, it does not necessarily mean that we thought it was anything wrong with the title. It doesn't mean that, if we didn't provide feedback, then most likely we didn't have any feedback up front. But we did recommend that if you wanted to, feel free, go, submit it elsewhere. We have changed our process so that we're reviewing titles every 4 months. So we're going to be doing another review cycle the beginning of December. I know, Caroline, I know you. May I make a recommendation too? The questions like this that are this personal, you may want to email me privately, just because I don't know that this is getting you the benefit that you want. Because I'm not on Submittable right now to answer these questions directly. I'm going to keep giving you broad answers. So, the broad answer again, if it wasn't included as part of our submission review period, and then in it, as you're saying, it says it's in progress. That means literally that. It just means that we didn't use it, as it wasn't part of that submission period. So we haven't looked at it yet. And it's not going to be looked at until December. Yeah. And again, you're welcome to send it wherever you want. That's not that's a non-issue. Which I'm sure that's not
And
what
the encouraging news is that Terror at the Sound of a Whistle has already been assigned an editor based on your preferences, and I'm working my way towards it.
That is very true. Yep, that's right. Yeah, because Ben is your editor, based on your
request. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so, for those of you who are watching and you may not be aware, the way that we approach this, assigning you an editor, is we actually ask you up front if there is an editor whom you would prefer working with, and then we approach that editor and ask them if they have availability. And then based on their response will depend on if they are assigned to the title or not. Part of the reason we do that is because we want to make sure this is the absolute best work it can possibly be. And with that in mind, typically if someone's passionate about a story, right, and they're really excited to be working on it, you're going to get a much better quality than someone who reads it and says, yeah, this is fine. Yeah, I guess I could edit it. Right. So, yeah, so that's why we take that approach. And you can always come to us with more than one editor whom you're interested in working with. You could name a couple of folks, because, as Ben just said, like I'm working on 4 novels, a memoir, and I just finished 2 novella anthologies. Ben's currently working on 2 short story anthologies and like 4 novels or something like that. And Amy
I think
is
it's 8 now.
It's 8 now.
There's 8 of them in the stack.
Yeah, so we're all just juggling, everything that's on our plate. So sometimes if an editor says no, it has nothing to do with the title itself. It just has to do with the fact that they're swamped. So,
although we have had some editors come back and say, I can't do this one, and for whatever reason, the personal reasons that they just didn't, they can't edit that story the way that it should be edited, so they let us know, and we're what can you do? You've got to find someone else, and so that's fine too.
Yep,
It's
that's right.
it's like and it goes back to the sensitivity. I'm working on a novel now that's set as an Iraq veteran who uh, kind of a semi autobiographical fiction piece. If that makes sense. But the sensitivity is he put a warning in there, but the warning is harsher than the story itself. So
Oh.
it's and which is kind of cool to have a warning that you need a warning for. But it's like we've talked about. It's ringing true, and that matters.
Mm. Well, that's good, I think,
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah, I'm not huge on warning labels. Just because I think if you picked it up and you knew it was horror, then you knew it was horror, right? If you know it's about someone who has PTSD during the Iraq War, you know what you're about to read. Like, this isn't
Yeah.
a shock.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we've also on occasion gotten stuff where I was like, whoo, this is nasty. Like, I'm not even sure but again, it goes back to what's the purpose of this? Like,
Yeah.
why is this occurring within the story? And if the author doesn't really have a good answer other than they thought it was cool, I'm not gonna be into it.
Yeah.
So,
And in this case, the warning is it's part of a series of narration 20 years later, and looking back, it's a different voice, but it's still narration of what's going on 20 years ago. But it's a 20-year-old, more mature, more older, more experienced voice looking back at the youth. So it's got a purpose. It's not just a warning for the whole book. It starts off with a series of it starts off the series of narration, and so it's got that good purpose, and that makes it cool. That makes it different, and
it makes it work.
We'll get there. Yeah, makes it work.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting. I've actually seen on social media a lot of agents and editors want warning labels on things that they are submitted. And I think it's very, at least I'm with you. Like, if it's horror, I know that there's going to be some some horror elements, right? There's going to be scary, creepy, probably really graphic things. And that's the genre though. And if it's a romance novel, there's going to be some spicy scenes, right?
Well, I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, that's the point of having these genres. But yeah, I've seen that more and more lately. Like, some of them they want warning labels for like a animal dies in this, or it has scary elements, and it's like, well, they're submitting horror, so
right,
of course there's going to be I always think that's interesting. I don't know.
I mean, I can see it if, like, let's say someone wrote, like, it's they're positioning it as young adult. They're not highlighting the fact that it has horror elements, or they're not highlighting the fact that it's really erotica, right? That I get that, right? And to me, again, that has more to do with, like, is this being positioned in a way that's true to the story? And I think there's plenty of times when authors write stuff and they think they're writing one thing, in reality they're writing something else. But my hope would be that before they actually start sending it out, they go, oh, epiphany, erotica wouldn't happen in YA. Okay, yep, now I'm gonna sell this as erotica. So I mean, I've heard some really a friend of mine wrote a novel and actually was talking about this. One of the biggest criticisms he got was that it had like mass murder in it. And, so someone said it needed a warning label. Well, guess what? It was about a hostile takeover of an entire country, basically, right? And it actually doesn't have mass murder in it. It references the fact that this entire village was wiped out. You don't
Mm.
see it. You don't experience it in the story itself, right? So, I think sometimes, again, if it, um, I think we take things a little bit too far, and we don't look at what is this actual story. Is this true to the story? Is this needed within the narrative? And if so, then okay, right? Then do it. But again, you do it in a way that is appropriate for that. Um, like you don't do a mass murder in middle grade. At least I hope you don't. um, and also you know, don't submit middle to a middle grade agent or a middle grade publisher a mass murder, right? Like it doesn't make any sense. Be aware, be cognizant of who it is that you're sending your work to and what
Mhm.
they're looking for. Because I think that oftentimes is what really triggers the desire when we hear about trigger warnings, is because an agent or an editor will have received something that was just wildly inappropriate for them in general. And so, they're like, well, I want trigger warnings now.
Mhm.
Well, honestly, I think it's more like that author should have used some more common sense and done some homework and said, "Oh, you only write, I mean, or you only publish, like picture books. Maybe I shouldn't have sent you erotica." No, yeah, probably not. Probably a bad idea, you know. But yeah, that's just something that there's not a whole lot you can do to force people to actually do their homework and provide what's being requested, but
Mhm.
you can make the recommendation. So
Yeah. But that's a good point about stepping back and really being critical of your work too, and saying, okay, well, what actually is this story? Once you've done the art piece, right? You've written the book, really stepping back and saying, okay, where does this fit in the market? What genre? Who are my readers? And doing that homework, and then going into whatever publisher or editor and finding the one that's best for you.
yeah, and it's okay. And the same thing with when you're pitching to someone in person, right? Like I've had several people approach me about picture books and about middle grade. That doesn't mean, we don't publish either one, right? It doesn't mean that I've never read a middle grade. It doesn't mean I've never read a picture book. That's asinine, right? But it just means that we don't, this isn't our forte. So, again, if you want to approach me and ask me to hear your pitch, to get my opinion on your pitch, that's fine. I'm probably still not going to be the best person to be doing this because we don't accept middle grade and we don't accept picture books. But I will be able to give you a position in terms of, does this accomplish, is it engaging, is it accomplishing what you hope it accomplishes, that kind of thing. So, I just, I hate to see people disappointed. I don't think anybody goes out there and says, you know what, today I want to break someone's heart. Wee! Like that just is not, at least no one that I'm friends with does that, at least not consciously. We all want to see everyone successful and everyone happy. So, know that, and so do your best, to really approach those who you think they are in align with what your vision is for your stories. Caroline Shannon Davenport says, yes, this is what I've been seeing. Taking things too far when I referred to sensitive in my question. Censorship if a book is in keeping to the story, time period, and character. Um, I've heard more and more about this, like censorship occurring. It's so dependent upon the editor and the publishing house, and their positioning associated with this. So I'm hoping it's not as flagrant as it seems to be. So cool. Well, with that, I'd say we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank Amy Brady, fabulous, Amy Hardy, and Ben White for joining us again this week, and everyone who was kind enough to ask us great questions. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Caroline. We look forward to seeing everyone, same bat time, same bat channel next week. And until then, I hope you have an amazing week. Bye, guys.
Bye.